started talking, and it was one of those things where it's like, let me just hit record because there's going to be some good stuff here. We were just talking about medicine journeys. So you were saying that you've never had an easy journey, let's just say. So to maybe,
Yes,
can you share a little? Do you feel comfortable sharing?
I sure do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, plant medicines. Well, let me see. I'm smart enough to know that it's probably something, everyone has to make their own decisions.
Right.
But I know enough about myself to know I know there's some dark stuff in there for me that
Yeah.
I've been holding on to some stuck programming, some blocks, some
Mm.
literal memory blocks of big periods in my life, disassociations. I've been through different therapies about it. I did a whole episode on my show about the trauma that I had to resolve. It was a
Yeah.
part of me ended up hiring Paul. Long story short is I knew that plant medicines could possibly help me access and heal these very deep subconscious parts of me, because that's the thing about your subconscious is it's subconscious. Like if you could change it with will, you would. Like no one wants to, carry around this baggage in their lives willingly,
Right.
right?
Right.
But
Right.
sometimes we need like a midwife,
Mm.
if you will, to help us access it. So I knew that I should probably venture into plant medicine to see if those would be an avenue that would help me access and heal. And to your point, and so far in my experience, yeah, I haven't had a wonderful experience yet. I've heard so many great things about people getting, especially with ayahuasca, getting downloads for their life mission, and
Right. Right.
huge.
Grandmother rocking them and
Thank
singing to
you.
them, and
Huge
it's just so
insights. Yeah,
beautiful.
the gates open. It's crystal clear. This is what you
Yeah.
should be doing. I'm like, yes, that's what I want. Because I mean, most of my life I've been like, what is my mission? Because I always knew I was
Yeah.
here for something,
Yeah.
which is something we can talk about later. But
Yeah.
anyway, needless to say, I haven't had a good experience yet. And Paul, my friend slash coach slash mentor, and I kind of get into this a little bit about
No stranger to the show. Paul Chek,
yeah.
one of our mutual friends. You've known him for a lot longer, but continue.
Yes, yes. So he's always been my guide in this because he certainly is my elder in that regard, every
Yeah.
regard.
Yeah.
But the main thing I'll just to make the point for people is, plant medicines is something that is to be held in high regard and with respect as all types of medicine, food, drug, whatever it may be, and that set and setting is critical. And from what I do know with my experience with plant medicine, I would never want to be one of these people that jump on a plane and go down to South America and do one of these group camps things. And I know I've done some
It's too
group
out
breath
there.
work.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's like, it can be traumatic. And like, if there's a lot of external dialogue going on, I mean, I just being safe, feeling safe, anytime you're accessing your subconscious or deep blocks or anything
Mm.
deeply emotional, I'm sure
Yeah.
heck with your work with
Birth and death. Yeah.
birth, and yeah, I mean, the feeling of safety is paramount to all healing and all ability to access these deeper sensitive vulnerable parts of ourselves. And
Yeah.
let me tell you, plant medicine is right up there
Yeah.
with the need to be safe. And
Yeah.
Paul provided that, is what I'm getting at.
Phew. Yeah. Yeah. I was just before I was, smart enough, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. Let's just be clear. I was like, I better start recording this. But right before I hit record, we were talking about Paul's birthday, where you and I never met each other, but there was like 100 of the most incredibly warm, accomplished, and open-hearted,
Vivacious.
open-minded,
Yeah.
vivacious, yeah, just lively people at Paul's
Loving.
60th birthday party, which was, gosh, he's coming up on 61 now. We need to
So
throw
it'd
him
be
another
2 years,
party.
Nathan.
Yeah, no, no, not
Nuts.
not 2 years. Was it 2 years
I
ago?
think so. Yeah, it was last summer. Yes, his birthday's August.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, yeah, after his party, a couple friends stuck around and we did this really deep dive. And while we're all, including, I won't use any names because I'm not at liberty to say that, but many people probably can imagine who was there knowing Paul Chek. But uh,
Hmm.
I was one of those fortunate few that got to go into ceremony with him. And I've done some deep dives, and this one glued me to the floor. I couldn't even get out to our mandala seating area outside. I was like on the carpet, vomiting on their poor carpet. I couldn't get up. So,
Sounds like
meanwhile,
me.
yeah, I mean, like
That's what happens to me, Nathan. I can't move.
yeah,
I get paralyzed.
it's like you're on an elevator that's like falling.
just
and you
sucking
just
you
want to
down.
latch onto the walls. Like maybe
Hmm.
this will keep me safe.
I can't move a limb. I'm like you. I'm like, I can't lift my arm. Like if I have
Yeah.
an itch on my head, I can't
I
move.
can't move. I am
Hmm.
glued here.
I'm
And
the same way.
it's like there's no way to escape this. Meanwhile, and like all of the other, there's only 4 or 5 of us, but meanwhile, the head honcho, Mr. Birthday Boy, is walking around banging a drum, quoting Carl Jung. He's like, "Woo, that's some good medicine, boys." And it was like, who the fuck is this guy? I mean, like, I haven't known him for very long, but
Yeah.
holy smokes, it was like, how are
Hmm.
you not like doing
Hmm.
what I'm doing? It was just wild. So this guy, Paul, you got to know him. You hired him as a coach,
Hmm.
somebody who has that depth of experience makes a very good mentor and coach, which he serves that role for me as well as a
I'm
mentor.
very blessed.
What was it that you worked with Paul on, if you care to share? And if
Of
not,
course.
maybe just describe the process.
Well, basically, it was a midlife crisis, Nathan.
Yeah.
Basically, I've known Paul about 3 decades. He was an instrumental part in my launch into the holistic health and wellness career. I started way back when as an aerobics instructor in the '80s with Jane Fonda and thong leotards and leg warmers and all that
Oh, the
'80s music.
leotards, the
That
thong
was
leotard.
me.
We're
Oh
gonna
yeah.
we're gonna put
Hmm.
that photo up as the promotional photo of
I
Amy
probably have
Fournier and
some. Okay, from the front,
okay, right,
not from
right,
the back.
right, and no mirrors behind you.
That's
We'll just
right.
blur that out.
That's right. That's right. Oh, I can tell you some stories about some of my outfits going, let's say wardrobe malfunction. Anybody? Okay.
Yeah,
But
right.
that's
Where it's
that's
not.
another story.
It's kind of
Yep.
like
But
a.
that started my career, and basically just because I was always an athlete. And back in my day, they didn't have women's collegiate sports that were on the level they are today. And they certainly didn't have women in the Olympics other than like swimming or, like, I don't know, volleyball maybe. But, like I played competitive sports as a woman, but there was no future in it. There was no
Yeah.
professional, like you get paid as a career.
What were you playing?
So
What sports? Just out of
a
curiosity.
lot of I played ice hockey,
No
but my
kidding.
my main one was soccer. Soccer
Ice
was
hockey
my
and
main. I
soccer.
played everything though. I got recruited for softball into high school and soccer as well, but really every sport, even basketball is a little short, but I played point guard, and yeah,
The
so
Steph Curry of the. Yeah.
always an athlete.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but again, long story short, I had to parlay that athleticism into something after well, once I was going into college, because I remember college was like, I'm not going to choose a college based on their sports because there's once I graduate, then what? You know what I mean? So I went into teaching aerobics. And that's
Hmm.
what really was a big part of my getting into health and fitness, but also two other parts, my own physical health challenges, as many people in our field,
Yeah. Yeah.
and my father struggled with cancer. So we
Mm.
were in very much the alternative, which I hate that term because it's not alternative, it's just a way.
It's just another
Um,
way. Yeah.
exactly. Anyway, so that was a big part of it. And the personal training, and then the personal training is what got me exposure to Paul and the Chek Institute and his
Right
teachings,
on.
started down the holistic nature, which so made sense because, the mind, body, spirit, we can't separate it. As everybody knows the story. So the rest is history. But to your point, um, well, I basically had a version of a midlife crisis a few years back. And even though I knew Paul personally and professionally, I one day reached out to Penny, his one of his wives, and said, "Penny, does Paul have room in his schedule for me? I think I really need him. I'm going down."
Mm.
And so he took me on, and actually, there's a story of it, episode 100, where he came on my show for the 100th anniversary. We tell the story because he talks about how he was waiting for me to contact him in that regard because we have a soul contract,
Yeah.
and we both knew it when we met. Like there was something, that deja vu, that familiarity with
Mm.
somebody
Hmm.
that's that means something,
Yeah.
that you've only known them a little bit, but there's a comfort level where you can truly take off any mask and be heart vulnerable and seen and see them, and it's comfortable. Or 10 years have gone by and you pick up where you left off,
Mm.
those type of synchronicities and connections are soul
Yeah.
connections.
Yeah.
And I'm so blessed, Nathan, that I had that with Paul. And so he was waiting for me, which made me feel better. And that's what started him helping me basically get back to Amy. Get back to Amy. I lost myself. I lost myself in my life. And he was a big part of me now pivoting, this huge pivot, which coincidentally corresponded right with the pandemic timing of a few years ago, because that was the catalyst that had me close my holistic lifestyle club in Massachusetts. And I pivoted my career and I started my podcast. And then when I started my podcast, it's really what, for the first time in my life, Nathan, enabled me to follow my soul's telling me what it was interested in, rather than being a good girl and trying to help others and giving others what I thought they needed or they were asking me that they wanted. So me being the martyr, like
Yeah.
so many, we're just
Yeah.
trying to be good people and,
Right.
contribute to the world. It's all beautiful intention. But you know what they say, the road to hell is paved by good intentions.
Yeah.
So in the meanwhile, I was sacrificing myself and I'm like, Jesus, I'm not a martyr. And that's where Paul started teaching me about archetypes. And I'm like, I don't want to be that one anymore. I pick another one. I'm moving up.
These underwear are all shredded and
Yeah,
there's holes, the tags
exactly.
all worn out. I need some new
Exactly.
underwear. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow. Let me ask you something that I haven't
Yes.
actually asked somebody on the show, but I think it's relevant because people reach out to me all the time, and I'm sure that you get this as well. People hear the word holistic, and even that word, I'm almost like, do we need to get a new word?
Mm-hmm.
Because what people think about holistic is they think it's natural. It's prescriptive, but it's natural. So instead of taking the pill, you're going to take this herbal supplement or something that's even more expensive than the pill. So there's a bit of a, I don't know, a confounding of this term holistic. You and I both, I'm sure, have an equal understanding, but can you tell everybody, what do you mean when you use the word holistic?
That's a great question, and it could be a very, very deep answer. I would say, just off the top of my head, it just means all inclusive. It
Yeah.
just means, there's nothing that we leave out. Everything, it's all one. It all contributes in some regard. Well, of course, the mind, body, spirit thing, but we get the different seven levels of the body. I mean, you got the different, the underworld, the middle world, the upper world. I mean, how big do you want to take it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
it's everything, because the universe, the one verse, right? The all from one, the omnipotent God,
Hmm.
Godhead, creatrix, creator, whatever you want to call it, all from the same source, right? So it's all one. And we've all heard that expression, we are one. It's harder to really conceptualize logically, but it's
Sure.
just that concept that it's all related. And the butterfly effect, right? Like, if a butterfly flaps its wings in Africa, does it affect Oklahoma 2 months later? Yes. Like, it's all connected in some regard, even if our brains are limited as to really conceptualizing and understanding
Beautiful.
how is that even possible.
Beautiful.
But to me, holistic is that. It's like there's really nothing we would leave out. Like,
Yeah.
it does matter that your child is upset at school and one of their friends is bullying them. That is going to affect the way you do your job. I mean, it's just a silly example,
Yeah. Yeah.
but and then that's going to affect how you eat that day and your stress response and what your brain is thinking about, which is the law of attraction, and then your energy field. And, so it's like, yeah, it all matters. And,
Right.
back in my day, probably like you've been doing this as long as I have in your field, we didn't, well, at least we weren't really given permission to kind of go into those realms. It was more like stay in your lane. And I
Right.
think you got that too,
Oh,
like
yeah.
they
Yeah.
didn't want, everybody specializes, right? But now we know better. It's like one of my favorite analogies from Paul, and I always say Paul is the king of analogies, which is
He
why,
really is, man.
right?
Yeah.
Nathan, that's why he's such a good teacher, because he
Yeah.
can take these really complicated concepts and he makes an analogy, which is brilliant. He makes the unfamiliar familiar. So he
Hmm.
relates it to something that the person can relate to so they understand it better.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite analogies of his is when he explains hormones, like stress response, emotions, right? To a spider web. What part of the spider web doesn't move when you touch it with your finger? The whole thing, right?
Hmm.
So a hormone, your cholesterol, your cortisol, your progesterone, pick it, is going to affect everything. So we can't isolate the body like that. And you take a medication for your heart, is it not going to affect your ears? Yes, it is, because you're all one unit.
Totally. Yeah. The definition that I have on I even have it in my Instagram profile because I realized this is important for people to remember. This is not just natural. The definition of
Yes.
holism that I have there, it's the shortest, most condensed version I could find. Parts of a whole cannot exist independently of the whole. So when we talk
Perfect.
about holistic lifestyle coaching, which is what we learn through Paul in the Chek Institute, etc., is yes, there's the physical, but there's also the mental, emotional, spiritual levels. There's this sort of collective consciousness that is not just a some platitude we can use in a coffee shop to show how spiritually enlightened we are. It's actually a very real thing as a healer, as a person who is serving somebody coming to them for healing. If we're only looking at the physical without considering that there are all of these other bodies that govern over the physical and govern over one another, they're all connected, within one another. So if we're only looking at the physical, whether it's natural, pharmaceutical, whatever else, we're still missing the big picture. So I appreciate you expanding on that a little bit with me.
100%. And I'll just add too, natural. A lot of people are using the natural in the same methodology as the
Exactly.
conventional. They're just like
Yeah.
applying an herb or whatever to
Yeah.
treat something
Yeah.
like a laser rather than looking at, everything. And one of the
Mm.
areas, and I know we don't want to get on a tangent, but I'll just say really gets me is like mental emotional health and, mood disorders and, these psychologists and whatnot. Cause I know from firsthand experience, even in my own family, they don't even ask people about their diet, their sleep, their exposure to EMFs. Give me a break. That's not affecting the way they feel. I
Yeah.
know if I go one night, like, okay, Nathan, part of it's your problem, okay, because you got me watching the birthing videos, okay, the
My
business.
problem.
Yes, because you got me watching. I'm addicted to these. I'm watching them multiple times. I get so upset. I
Yeah.
know we can talk about it, but the business of birth control, the business of birthing, thank you, by the way, for turning me on to them. They're phenomenal. Everybody's got to watch them. But what
Mm.
happens is, Nathan, is the only time I've been able to watch them is at night after work. So that's what I'm getting at as I'm streaming them on my computer. So I got my blue blockers on, but it's still keeping me up at night, but it's well worth
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
anyway, just my point is even like a few nights of watching those very important documentaries, it screwed me up for the day. I
Yeah.
found the next day I was eating ice cream like by the tub. And I'm like, what am I doing? And
Yeah.
so give me a break. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It does
Yeah.
matter. We have to ask these holistic questions of our friends, family, patients, whatever, because how can all that not be contributing to what's happening for people?
Yeah. We never really did a formal introduction of who you are and what you're doing. You've been on this journey. Tell everybody what your practice is now. Are you still working with clients? And is your podcast really your primary focus? Tell people a little bit about how you're spending your time.
Okay, great. Well, my main shtick right now is definitely Awakening Aphrodite, my podcast, without a doubt. It's my baby. It's my heart and soul. Like I said, I had this huge pivot. I used to have a holistic health club in Massachusetts, and we closed it at the pandemic, and that was a big shift for
Oh
me.
man, what a bummer.
I've been a fitness and yoga instructor, dance instructor most of my adult life since the late '80s, and I also teach online. I have an online on demand library of classes I add to every week. It's just a whole mishmash of everything. I'm basically certified in like everything. I strength, yoga,
Sure.
dance,
Sure.
everything. Mm, Embodiment method, like Michaela Boehm's work with nonlinear movement method, different types of
Mm.
therapy, mobility, Tai Chi. I learned from Paul, all that stuff. But the podcast is my main thing. And then I have my women's circle, which right now is online, which is beautiful. And that is in anticipation of one day when I can again hold my in person events and retreats. That's what I'm working on. I'm working on finding my home,
Yeah.
my dream home, my sanctuary. I've been looking for 2 years, and it will be a hybrid between where I live and commune with the land and heal myself and create a sanctuary where others can come and work with me and live with
Yeah.
me and learn what I do. And I can bring in experts like you to teach us for retreats and events and hopefully hold my classes. I love teaching dance and all this women's movement. So that's where I'm
That's
going.
amazing.
But
I
we
love
do
that.
have the online women's circle. And I am taking on select private clients as well for online coaching because I've
Right
been getting
on.
a lot of requests and
Yeah.
I really resisted it for a long time. But I feel like, Nathan, I'm kind of getting resourced again to be ready. I just didn't have it to give between the podcast and everything else going on.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I guess I'm feeling like it feels good to
Yeah.
that might be nice to do. I have to always catch myself because when like you when you're in a service role and health service mindset, when you see a need, it's really hard to
Yeah.
say no,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like and that and this is a big lesson I have spiritually. I've had to learn these boundaries of
Setting boundaries.
right, like me, where's me and you know, and where's my self-preservation and my self-care and not feeling bad about meeting my own needs, you know,
Mm.
and disappointing you
Yeah.
and bearing the brunt of you being upset, you being hurt, you whatever, pushing back against me and holding my boundary like, no, I need to do this for me and not feel like I have to earn it either. Like, well, I've worked so hard, I deserve this, you know.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
a whole convoluted thing, but something that I've been working through myself. So
Yeah.
but I'm getting there.
Yeah, and something that I definitely wanted to ask you about was for people like us. I mean, everybody out in the world is in yang excess. We're all being incentivized to be more productive, to build bigger things, which is why when we're going to talk about archetypes and transitions in life, but when you retire, this word retirement is scary to people because if you're not producing, then you're not valuable.
Mhm.
And if you're not valuable, then what do we do with you? We push you away into an old person's home so you can play pickleball until you drop dead someday in your 80s or something like that. That's kind of the typical American story. So what can we bring perhaps, to somebody listening who finds themselves in this yang excess, which I think comes with the unfortunate side effect of not being able to, it's not a side effect, it's actually because of our inability to set clear boundaries, especially in the healing arts. What have you done instead of just continuing on this yang excessive journey? What have you done to actually embrace and nourish the yin in Amy?
Such a $1,000,000 question. And unfortunately for me, I'm a slow learner. I had to get a brick fall on my head. And like I said, have to hire someone to help me and dig me out of a big hole
Yeah.
because I hit such bottom.
It's like
I,
Paul says, the pain teacher is going to keep knocking. You're going
let
to
me
have to
tell you,
answer the door eventually.
took me out. Talk about being out for plant medicine.
Yeah.
I was just, I couldn't, like, don't want to be too dramatic, but I was really like done, you know?
Mm.
And, so for unfortunately to answer your question for me it took that level of it basically had to get so bad that I would do anything. So all these people that have trouble making change, quote unquote, and doing it what is they know they should or got to
Yeah.
do or whatever. I always think, well, you know what, they're not in enough pain yet, because when you
That's
get to
right.
be yeah when you get to be in enough pain, you'll do anything,
Yeah. Yeah.
anything. And for me, I'm like, I'm pretty strong willed and I had to get that bad. So I had to be open to another way, just another way. And it started with little things like every morning, going out barefoot on the ground and doing some movement like qigong or tai chi, which is just basically rhythmic movement with breath, really connecting to nature. For me, Nathan, a big part, which is a big part of my work now with women,
Yeah.
is teaching us embodiment and getting into our five senses or six senses or seven senses, however many you
Sure.
have access to.
I have about
That
11 or so. No, I'm
you
kidding.
probably do.
No.
You're a master plant medicine guy. So I'm sure
No,
you've
I'm
been in.
only teasing.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah, but that was huge for me. It sounds so minor, but let me tell you, well, I lived decades without living
Mm.
in my
Mm.
body, like without using my sense of smell, my hearing, my feeling. Like when was the last time you're outside you actually consciously became aware of the wind on your skin, the
Yeah.
feeling? Like we
Yeah.
don't even notice it.
The
'Cause
sheets on your skin in the
thank
morning, the
you.
first thing in the
Yeah.
morning. Yeah, I totally
Little
hear that.
things like we just miss all this stuff because why? Our brain is so overdeveloped and so focused and so linear and logical, and we're up here between the ears. We've turned off so much of our body's ability to connect.
Yeah.
with these other realms and talents and input and sensations. So to answer your question, that was a big part for me,
Yeah.
was utilizing all my other senses on a daily basis from moment to moment, taking 2 extra seconds in the morning when I drank my tea to smell it as I lifted it up to my lips. I never did that before. I
Hmm.
would just down it. Oh, I need some green tea. I'm tired, whatever, like, no,
Smell
feel
the
the warm,
matcha. Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
feel the warm cup in your hand. Take a moment, feel it.
Mm.
So I literally got into my body more on a daily basis, which was the doorway that opened up this whole realm of this other part of me, the feminine part, the feeling, the sensate part, which was critical to get out of my head.
Mm.
Because, like so many women, which is a big part of my show and my work, we live in our heads and we wonder why we're stressed out, or we're just not fulfilled, or we're just not happy, or we can't ever really feel like we really got it all going on a deep level, because something's missing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I suspect I'm not a rocket scientist as I've already mentioned, but I suspect that the title of your podcast is very apropos for this transition that you went through.
Indeed.
Tell me about the name of your podcast. It's Awakening Aphrodite. Tell me
Mhm.
about why you chose that name.
Yes, well, you hit the nail on the head. It's basically because I feel like I lived the first half of my life predominantly in my masculine principle, my
Mm.
masculine essence. And like we always say, masculine and feminine is not a gender. It's a principle. It's a principle in the universe of the great polarities, the yin and the yang, and the duality of all of life. And for me, like, regardless of your biological, physiological gender, we, as you know, we all have the each essence in ourselves, the X and the Y chromosomes, and different aspects of the masculine, feminine in us. And it's just a matter of degree who
Yeah.
has a little bit more of one than the other. And for me, I just was not in balance, and that
Yeah.
is a symptom of the shadow, is that when the polarities are out of balance is when you get into problems. So I was over masculinized in that
Mm.
I was living from my head,
Yeah.
and I was very ambitious. I still am very ambitious. I still, like I said, I have to always pull it back. But now it's just getting easier for me as I've been doing it more. It feels better for me, and I get signals from my body a lot clearer, a lot sooner before I get to burnout, which is great. So I'm learning. But I just was living in my logical, push it, nose to the grindstone, analytical self, out of good intentions, but at the expense of the whole other half of myself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the name of my show, Awakening Aphrodite, everybody, well, most people are aware with the amazing Greek goddess Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love and beauty, but she's also the goddess of relationships and relating. And she's the goddess that holds the mirror. And she holds the mirror, Nathan, not because
Oh,
she's
I love
vain
that.
and she wants to look at her beauty, but because she symbolizes the importance of self reflection. Just like the moon is the feminine principle to the sun, the masculine,
Right.
the 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 need for all of us to take a pause, to stop all the action, to pull back, to go into the feminine and reflect
Mm.
and to process and to receive and to just sit and gestate. That's the feminine.
God,
That
I love that.
whole part of being was not in my lexicon. Like, that just never happened. It was push it, push it, push it. If you want to make it happen, you got to be the one that makes it happen.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Like all that. So I named my show that because for the symbolism of Aphrodite, everything she embodied, the feminism of Aphrodite. I liked how it was awakening, because for me, she was always there. I had to awaken her. It wasn't the birthing of Aphrodite. It was, bringing her back from her slumber. So there's a lot of reasons for that name, but also because people are familiar with it, and sometimes women get attracted to it. I think, in all honesty, because the power of the goddess and wanting to be attractive and beautiful and feminine and have that sexual libido and power. And, I think we'd be lying if everybody said they didn't want that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
sure, what's wrong with that? But she's much more than just a pretty face.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
much more than that because, again, she's the goddess of love and relationships. And at the end of the day, that's what all of life is about, love and relationships.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's a perfect title for your show because of, you mentioned this before, but the best, I don't know, practitioners, when you finish your school and your training and all that other stuff, let's say you're a doctor. When you finish medical school, you don't know shit about the practice of medicine. When you finish residency, you know even less about medicine. You know how to keep people from dying, but you actually haven't set forth into that domain where you can utterly fail. Perhaps a patient dies. In my world, maybe a baby dies. This is all a part of that experience. And and we have to go through these transitional periods. We have to hit, rock bottom in some cases before we can pull ourselves up and then turn our attention to somebody else and care for them. But how many people in the, healing professions, they're coaches, whatever else, they're like 25, they're ripped, they're always out on the beach doing this workouts and stuff. They're now going to help somebody get healthy. Well, in some ways, yes, maybe. But the best practitioners out there have been broken down to a point where they have to build themselves back up and then help somebody else perhaps avoid those pitfalls or rebuild themselves, for themselves, based on this experience, here's what I can offer to you. So many of us, including Paul, he's been wrecked in his life in a variety of ways. We won't even get
Mhm.
into his story because he talks about it on his podcast all the time. But the reason he's so good as a therapist, whether it's from the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual side, is because he has made a lot of mistakes and he has found himself broken and he has had to rebuild himself from there. But that's not possible unless we can reflect on our journey and really look, in Carl Jung's words, look into the shadow and actually go into that space where we don't want to go, admit that we were wrong, admit that we maybe don't have the answer, and then to build from there. So I feel like Aphrodite is a perfect reflection of that process for us as practitioners and the people that we hope to serve.
Well, she's certainly my lighthouse. She's my goal, my aspiration. She's the pull for me. And to your point, I totally get what you're saying because now I've realized as I'm entering another phase of my life that the whole wounded healer thing that you're getting at is so true because I was a young girl in my late 20s when I started in the health and fitness industry. And but now I can recognize in others this type of mentality that I had back then too, because you can see, like
Yeah,
you said, the bodybuilder on the beach and, the whole thing going, and that's all fine and good. But we can't, as healers and teachers, we can't truly help and heal others unless, to your point, we've already traversed that path
yeah, yeah,
on our own
right.
because it's gnosis with a G, right? I mean, how effective are you going to be if you haven't experienced something? It's like saying to someone, God forbid, that lost a child, oh God, it must be horrible. Well, that's why there's support groups, right, with other people who've also lost children, because no one really knows how does anyone know what it's like to have twins, two babies, not just one, right? Unless it's another mother of twins. You can imagine. Well, the same thing goes for everything in life is
Yeah,
truly the people that are the most effective, like Paul, back to Paul. You can't bullshit Paul on stuff because he's been through it. Like he'll just
yeah,
call you on it because he knows because he did the same thing, and he can tell when someone's just kind of talking around something. And that goes for any gifted healer who's really walked the path. So I think that's where wisdom comes in. It doesn't always come with age, but it usually does, just because, time in life takes experience, right? It just takes time, like to go through all these different things. Usually it doesn't happen before you're 20.
yeah, yeah.
So
Man,
I know for me that's what it was. And I can now see in younger generations, stuff because I'm in a different vantage point now,
yeah,
which is cool because, Nathan, I feel like, I know we can talk about rites of passage and stuff. because I know that's a topic both you and I enjoy.
Yeah.
Uh, it's important because our generations of this day and age, they don't have positive role models, and the rites of passage is just missing in our culture. And these are important portals of transitional periods in our mental, physical, emotional, spiritual development that are just missing now. And people are subconsciously or whatever looking for them. And we need our wise elders. And it's like, where are they? Well, most of them are trying to be 20, or whatever.
Yeah, the fake
And
boobs, the
yeah,
injections, the like, I need to be that maiden. I think that this is a nice time to get into some of those
okay.
transitions in life. Go, but continue. We'll flow it into there.
Yeah, well, I guess I was just saying that I hope someday I aspire to be wiser as I grow older. I used to always grow for or grow or pray or intend to grow in love and being the love, not just feeling it and giving it, receiving it. Receiving it was something I had to include in my prayers because
Mm.
I was really not very good at that. Um,
Do you think there's a worthiness aspect to that? Yeah,
Totally,
yeah,
totally. I mean, the like back to the fitness thing, because I was overweight when I was in my late 20s. So I was the athlete, but I was kind of like the chunky one, the cute,
yeah.
chubby one. And but it was in the 80s when I started teaching aerobics that I really kind of got in shape. And
Leaned
then I
out.
noticed
Yeah,
how the whole world taught me, treated me differently. So
yeah,
yes, worthiness was a loaded issue for me, and the earning it and all that. I think everybody goes through that in some regard, whether it even just be you're a mom and feeling like you're worthy because you're a quote unquote good mom, and then your
yeah,
kids are out of the nest, and it's like, oh crap, who am I now? And you
yeah,
get codependent because you're like, you want your kids to need you, but now who are you without them? So pick your lane. We all go through it in some regard of, okay, well, who am I as an independent soul? And just my value as a soul that came here incarnated on earth without
yeah.
doing anything. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, how's that for a concept?
Right, right. You speak so eloquently about this that I don't even want to say anything in order to distract from what you just said. I mean, that's such a critical point for people. And yes, we were gifted, we were vested with this body. So, what can we do with this body? It's not just lifting weights and getting lean and looking pretty and staying in that maiden archetype, if you're a female. Is there more to this? And one of the classic examples I can give is I have more and more couples coming to me at every age with fertility concerns. Now, whether or not they're actually not able to get pregnant is not really the question. The question is, are you ready for this transition? And 9 times out of 10, they haven't even thought about the transition. My wife even had to have me say it out loud. Things are going to change. And I know that sounds totally crazy when people hear that. But it was like, we're just going to fold them into our life. We're going to keep going to festivals and we'll just find a babysitter. And she's like, babe, things are going to change. Please say it out loud.
Repeat after me.
It does not feel good to me to think that you're going to continue doing all of this stuff. I was a really good rock climber and I wanted to get more into surfing. And we were out in San Diego when we first got pregnant. And I was like, this is before we got pregnant, but I was like, okay, yeah, things are going to change. And saying the words, putting those words into our relationship has a profound impact because then all the fear set in, then all of the hesitation and apprehension set in. Like, do we really want kids? Do I really want kids? I don't know if I want to change. But
I
now
like
that
my
the
life the
word,
way it is now.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And
Mhm.
that's not to say that transitions aren't can't be beautiful, but you are going to go through transitions, regardless of how badly you want to hold on to, with that kung fu grip to your old self. Even the birthing process itself is you are dying and being reborn as a mother, as a father, as a unit. And this baby, of course, is now being brought into life, and you have to keep this little kiddo alive. So, I mean, apart from teaching them how to be a good person and everything else, but let's talk a little bit about the transitions in life as a woman.
Mm.
When we spoke on the phone yesterday, you broke it down into 4 archetypes. I'm not going to spoil it. So just why don't you
Ah,
run us through those? Because this is, I think, really critical for what I do in women's healthcare.
yeah. And then we can get into the rites of passage as well, which is
Yes,
related.
please.
So, most people have heard of the triple goddess. If you visualize the three phases of the moon, the waxing moon, the full moon, the waning moon, the dark moon, the new moon. Although that's a little convoluted because most people don't know there's a difference between the dark moon and the new moon, by the way, because the dark moon is actually 3 days, and the new moon is the second day of the dark moon, and that's something we talk about in my women's group
Mm.
because it's very important. It's a critical time of letting go for women. But basically, in the female psyche, there's what's thought of as the 3 phases of womanhood, which is also, again, the triple goddess, the 3 phases of the moon, as well as the 3 phases of a woman's life of passage, which is, you mentioned one, the maiden, the mother, and the crone, or the wise woman. Now, the word crone has been a stick for me because I just haven't liked that word. But when I researched it, I found that the root origin of the word means crown. So, of course, back in the day, it was revered, it was respected, it was admired, it
Yeah.
was looked forward to. Like
We
this was
worshipped our elders. Yeah.
yeah. So it
Yeah.
was wise. So wise woman. So those 3 phases are very critical. And usually that is the trajectory of a woman's life. However, as you and I spoke about, which is amazing because me, and our mutual friend, the amazing, beautiful Nicole Devaney, also a
Hmm.
Czech practitioner.
You should introduce me to her, by the way. I've never
Oh,
met
okay.
her.
Yes.
Yeah,
You've
she'd be
got
a
to
good
have her on
person
your
to
show.
know.
She's just one of us, my friend. Let me tell
Right
you,
on.
she is, I can't wait to work with her one day. We're going to
Yeah.
definitely do goddess retreats together.
Yeah.
I will definitely hook you up with her.
Please.
But she was on my show. I think it was maybe 72 or no, episode 90. I think she was. Yeah, I remember because it was a 9. And okay, so we talked about, we both thought that should be 4 phases of the feminine
Hmm.
cycle. There should be the maiden, the mother, a third phase, which would either be, according to Nicole, she called it the Empress. I called it the warrior or the queen, and you called it the queen
I
because you
did.
came up with
Yeah.
it too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the crone or the wise one is the fourth. So the 3 of us, independently, everyone, which is super cool. And I'm sure we're not the only ones in the whole
Well,
planet that
Sarah
have thought of this.
Gustafson, let's also remind everybody, Sarah is also doing a lot of archetypal work, and
Oh,
she might even have a different variation. So we'll have to ask her and
and she was on my
incorporate that
show
in.
twice. We didn't, you know what we should do? We should do a group
We
podcast.
should. How
Yeah,
about we just all go hang out together and
that's
have
even
have
better.
an awesome meal? I mean, that would be fun too. We can record it, but let's
Anytime,
get back
anytime.
in
Well,
person.
this is part of why I can't wait to have my
Yeah.
healing ranch because
Yeah.
we'll do that over a weekend. But whatever, anytime I'm down for that, night or day. But anyway, Nathan, I thought it was cool as you mentioned that you and I and Nicole and Sarah and probably others came up with this idea that this is missing one. Like this is missing a very critical part of a woman's life experience, a potential. These are potentials, of that warrior, empowered empress, queen, whatever you want to call it, phase where she's sovereign. She has sovereignty. And that is critical because I don't know about you, but that really is one of the goals I have in my life is for physical, emotional, spiritual, mental sovereignty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean independence as in like you're an island. No. It just means you have the agency of yourself.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
in the Greek myths, they refer to the goddesses as the virgin goddesses.
Hmm.
But when they're talking in the mythology and in the Jungian culture, when they refer to a virgin goddess, just so people know, it's not sexual, it's not literal, it's symbolic, and it's virginal in the fact that she is independent, she is dependent onto herself, she has sovereignty. So Artemis was considered a virgin goddess, and she's the goddess of the hunt and the moon,
Mm.
and
She's
she
the
she
one that
was
you always see in these
the bow
sexy
and arrow. She was basically
busts. Yeah.
yeah, she was basically Diana, who was Wonder Woman. That's Artemis. That is after the
Yeah.
yes, and she was considered a virgin goddess. Um, and actually, Aphrodite, just not to get off a tangent, but she was the only alchemical goddess, according to Dr. Jean Shinoda Bolin, who was on my show, an amazing Jungian psychologist who coined that term because Aphrodite, just a little side note, was very unique in that she was vulnerable. So there was basically there's 2 camps. The virgin goddesses, which were sovereign and unique, kind of our warrior queen type that you and I were referring to.
Yeah.
And then you have the vulnerable goddesses, which are more the maiden types, which are the Demeter and Persephone and Hera, who's the wife. the wife of Zeus.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
That's
yes,
amazing. Yeah,
yeah,
you just heard my episode I did on the history of Western medicine, witches and women
fabulous.
healers. There's quite a bit of mythology. Like the cosmologies actually have had a more profound, let's say changes to our cosmologies have had a more profound impact on how we relate to one another, especially how we value or devalue women in society. It's all tied into the history of our cosmologies, which is why I think it's so important to bring this into the conversation. So continue. This is
Well,
awesome.
actually, I have a question for you. So, when you're, can you expand on that a little bit, just to explain what you mean by how it's the cosmology affects us in modern day? I'd love
Yeah,
to know.
sure. And this isn't actually going to go as woo woo as maybe people want it to be. But if we look back to, like, let's say ancient Sumer, ancient Denmark, some of our earliest written human history, we had female deities, we had bisexual deities, we had androgynous deities, we had deities that were um, sexual in their nature. And I don't mean sexual again, like we're talking about, intercourse or anything else, but it was back then that these female deities, given their inextricable link to nature, to fertility, to this creative force of the cosmos being birth, that this was something to be worshipped, this power, the magic. And really, even as we watch the evolution of women healers over time, the the source of a woman's power was her sexuality. And we are not talking, again, everybody, like, get it out of your heads. I'm not just talking about, you know, let's have sex and pornography or anything
Sex
else.
magic.
It was this creative force of the cosmos was expressed itself through women, and that was enough for us to worship women. So much so that we figured our deities after them. But then, as we saw over time, especially when Christian theology really took over most of the world, we saw that change from a largely polytheistic, a lot of female deities, to a sort of dyadic mother father, even in early Christian sects. And then, not long after that, we had the Holy Trinity: Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And then you had Mary worship, where we actually had the woman kneeling to her son in worship. And that was kind of what cemented, I think, the path to where we find ourselves now, where we have a taboo around sexuality, a taboo around fertility and birth. We even have a taboo around death, because the female deities were so inextricably linked with nature. And if, with Christian theology taking its sort of throne, so to speak, if women are connected to nature and men could be granted the knowledge as to how to control nature, antibiotics, antihistamines, surgeries, you name it, men were now able to control women. And that Mary worship period was kind of sealed the fate of women being inferior to men over time. And we see it in the healing practices. Above all, we see it in how we attend to birth. It's this a desperate effort to control nature, which
Oh,
is really just symbolic of controlling the feminine. So
Nathan,
that's a
that's so
brief,
cool. I never thought
brief,
of it like that.
yeah. It's quite a fascinating, I think,
Yeah.
story there. Which is why when you bring up conversations around
Mm.
cosmologies, it
Hmm.
fits right into this. Like, this is a really important part of our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being.
Hmm.
Is what do we even how do we even craft the divine? What is the image of the divine? It's a man
Hmm.
in the clouds, separate from Mother Earth,
God the
separate
Father.
from Gaia, from Pachamama, from Prithvi. Like, all of these incredibly powerful female deities were replaced by one single deity that is not of within Earth, but above and outside of Earth, domaining over the feminine.
Yes. And
Powerful.
even the Holy Trinity excludes a female essence. It's Father, Son, Holy Ghost. There's no female entity in that Trinity. And,
Hmm.
I have an episode about
Yeah.
that too. We talk about just, well, not to the depth and intelligence that you just said, but we get into that a little bit about the in my episode on feminine spirituality, because there's a big disconnect for a lot of women in deep gnosis, again with the G, of their spirituality, because we're brought up in the Judeo-Christian
Yeah.
Christian cultures to think of God the Father, but we're not a
Yeah.
man. So how is that? How do I relate to that essence? And then forget about all the watching you judgmental. You're gonna,
Yeah. Yeah.
gonna go to hell, and
Total
let's
perversion.
just not
Yeah.
forget about how women are the root of all evil. By the way,
Yeah.
because we were the one that tempted men and pulled them from the Garden of Eden. So our punishment was pain in childbirth and periods,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and we're the temptress and all that. But
Yeah.
Nathan, are you familiar with the book, the Magdalene manuscripts?
Yes, I have it.
Okay.
I have it. I haven't finished
Yes.
reading it,
Mm-hmm.
only because I actually, when I started reading it, I was so distracted
Right.
with pregnancy. We were pregnant with our
Oh, you're
second
yep.
that I just wasn't able to contextualize it appropriately. In a
Deep.
book like that, I
Yeah.
wanted to be able to really absorb it. So I'm saving it for one of those trips where I have one book to read
Oh
and I can
yeah.
take my time and just peel through it. So, but tell me, what was it? What was a takeaway maybe?
It's deep. I haven't finished it yet. Like you,
Yeah.
I can only take it in small doses because it's so deep for me.
Yeah.
The ramifications, the I also struggle. Like, another great book is When God Was a Woman by Merlin Stone,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
classic.
Yeah.
I mean, I struggle because I like justice and freedom for all. And again, sovereignty, live and let
Yeah.
live. It's your life. You do what you want. I'm not one to judge, as long as you're not hurting others,
Oh,
type thing.
yeah.
It's just, all this stuff that was done, in the name of God, the millions of murders, and look at the witch hunts and all this crazy. The
The
what's that?
witch
The
hunts.
book you reference in your the manuscript there, the
Well, there was one.
Maleficent.
The Malleus Maleficarum, the
Thank
hammer
you,
of the witches,
Maleficarum.
about this thick, Amy, about
Yep,
6 inches thick,
I
as to
have it.
how a wife how a woman, mostly women and children, were killed then,
Mm-hmm.
could be tried, what you could bring them to trial for, and
Mm-hmm.
how to actually perform the execution.
Yep.
Sick, written by
And you're
two
justified
sons.
in the
Yeah,
name of God.
in the name
You
of
know,
God. And it was written by two reverends who were the sons of Pope Innocent VIII. Go figure. I mean, this is
so much for
really,
the 10 commandments, though,
yeah,
because isn't thou
yeah,
shall not kill? I mean, I just don't even get it. The whole thing
yeah,
is very confusing to me.
yeah,
But for the Mary Magdalene manuscripts, I was horrified, Nathan, to learn, because I was raised Christian Catholic
yeah.
and I went to Catholic school. And I was horrified to learn that Mary Magdalene, who everyone is now calling a prostitute, right?
Mm,
She actually had a gospel.
mm,
We weren't taught that. We didn't learn her gospel. We didn't learn her teachings. She was known as Jesus, with Jesus,
yeah.
his soul companion partner. And the term was, I actually wrote it down, it's kainos, Koinonos, which means soul companion partner.
Kainos. Hmm.
Yes, I might not, yes, I'm sure you're
That's
pronouncing.
probably written in. It's probably a
Yep.
Hebrew term.
In the Gospel of Thomas and Peter, they referred to her as she was his partner in teaching and implementation, as well as in love and in life, that she was an equal to him, that they were a partnership, because she was a priestess and her
Mm,
mother was a priestess. So she was trained in a lineage of spiritual alchemy and practices and ritual. She wasn't just like the girl in the corner that, this spiritual dude hook up with. I mean, they were partners, and they matched each other in their capacities.
wow.
And to your point, they back then they had a understanding, a respect, a reverence for the female physical body being the
Yeah.
portal to the divine, and that both were equally as important. Though it's not that the man was some schlump, and the woman was this, perfect angel. It wasn't that. It was just you needed the two to come together in
Sure.
equal respect and importance. But
Hmm.
that a lot of Jesus's I don't want to say capabilities, but a lot of his, well, I guess abilities, was through his alchemy, his connection, his communion with her, because she actually, this, according to this book, taught him a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
which of course he had his own, abilities and whatnot, of course, as
Yeah.
divinely, but according to these passages that are now, long been destroyed, although they did find one of the gospels, one version of Magdalene's gospel that they did recover, which is how we know all this stuff. But a
Yeah.
lot of it was burned and destroyed because they just, didn't want people to, have the power within themselves. They wanted to have the power go through the church.
Yeah, I also wonder a little bit about the Bible, of course, has been translated, revised, parts omitted, parts added. I mean, it was always a means of controlling the
Interpreted.
masses. Interpretation, of
Mm-hmm.
course. And
Huge.
koinonos, it strikes me as a Greek term,
Mm.
but the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. So at what point did that term was that actually found in the Old Testament, in the Gospels? That's kind of what my question is. And if
Mm.
so, when was it added? When was that interpretation made? Or maybe it was something that had originally been omitted, and then when it was
Mm-hmm.
translated into Greek, they put it back in. Like, I wonder.
Yep.
I mean, it's an interesting history, the
Good
Bible
question.
is.
Well, I
Yeah,
think it's exactly to your point. I mean, probably it was something like they interpreted it as like, okay, they're talking about soul partners
yeah,
and,
yeah.
they're basically quote unquote married,
Hmm.
so somewhere along the line, someone applied that term. Oh, that just means soulmates. And they put it
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
Italian.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's
Wow.
interesting. The chronology. Yeah. But I guess I think the bigger point that you and I are getting at is that this important equal role of the feminine, this critical equal role that in the egalitarian societies, and the like the book The Chalice and the Blade with Elaine Reisner and her work showing these egalitarian societies that were, and even in the biogeometry training we talk about that in advanced training with the netters.
Yeah,
They were called the netters, which were basically the nature gods, which were the
yeah,
feminine force.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
the Egyptians knew about this stuff,
Sure.
and that this is very, very powerful stuff. But there was always the masculine feminine, because we know that when they come together we have spirit, we have unity, we have consciousness, we have creation, we have movement. You
Yes.
need
Yeah.
the two
The
to.
polarity. Yeah.
There
Yeah.
you
It's hard
go.
to
Yeah.
argue that. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
argue that. That is this creative force of the cosmos that I'm describing requires a polarity. There's no
Mm-hmm.
voltage. And this is again back to Paul Chek. Gosh, that guy's done a lot.
Yeah.
But his, like if love is this creative force, we need a polarity here. We need an anode and a cathode, a negative and a positive charge.
Like a
Um,
battery.
like a battery. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
100%. Which is, and back to what our point was earlier, that I think all of us are trying to navigate, Nathan.
Yeah.
I know for me, my battery was out of balance. I was all positive,
Yeah.
and let me tell you, positive led to negative, because that's what happens is nature abhors a vacuum, it's going to balance out that pendulum. So
Sure.
I was way on one side. I had the seesaw, had to go way to the other side, which I really didn't do as much. Because one of the things that Paul, when he first started coaching me, asked me to do was to like rest and take time off. And I
Yeah.
didn't do that officially because I kind of started a podcast, but compared to my scheduled time, I did back off a lot. And
Yeah.
and to this day, I still will do things. I take breaks. In the middle of the day, I take my dog for a walk just because my brain's going to blow up from too much stuff on my plate. Or
Sure.
and I started a little habit of trying to eat my meals outside with the birds with no technology. Little things, and I think that's key for everybody. Is we're all so busy. We all tend to probably, if you're listening to our shows, probably like to be achievers, and we tend to get a little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Well, how do we make it a lifestyle? Sneaking in the little things, like I said, I started just little things, eating my meals outside, no technology in the middle of the day. I'll take a walk for 20 minutes with my dog, no technology. I have a strict, like, turn off my phone at 9 o'clock at night, little things like that. But let me tell you, they add up.
Beautiful. Yeah, let's talk something I think that is sort of related to this work. We're going to save a piece of this conversation around continuing to work on oneself, looking in the
Mm,
mirror of Aphrodite. When you worked with Emily Abbott, who's now a mutual friend of ours, let's put a pin in that part because I want to finish with that. Before we get to that, I also want to talk a little bit about rites of passage. We brought it up a little bit
mm.
earlier. I'm gonna let's just talk about rites of passage. What comes to
Okay.
mind for you when we think about the lack of ceremony and ritual in our lives?
That how my father used to always say, you know, the older I get, the faster time goes. And I don't know where time goes, Amy. And now I find myself saying that. And my point is, Nathan, that I feel like without putting pins in significant stages and periods of our life is just one continual rolling down the hill. You know what I mean? We never take that moment out to, again, Aphrodite, pause, reflect, process, integrate, integrate.
Mm,
Takes a beat, requires a breath, requires stopping. You can't take in new until you let go and make room for it, right?
yeah.
So back to the phases of the moon. The dark new moon is the time to let go. You have to let go stuff you don't want anymore. The relationship, the job, you pick it, to make room for the new better one. Because if you're hanging on like, the monkey bars, you're
Yeah.
hanging on to one bar while you're reaching for the other, you got to let go of one so you can really grab the new one. And you got to, back to your point about being uncomfortable with uncertainty, like so many of us are. But life requires courage.
Yeah.
Life requires bravery. That's the heroine's journey. That's the hero's journey. You got to go out. You got to leave the ship. Ships were not meant to stay in the port, right?
Right.
So, anyway, what I'm getting at is I feel like in our culture, we have lost these rites of passages. And in all cultures across time, they've always had these ceremonial times of marking big periods of growth, or they were either physical or cultural rites of passages. So we have physical ones like birth, uh, so taking your first step, your first period, or for men, your first time you have to shave.
Yeah.
These are all rites of passages. Your first sexual experience, if you give birth, as in labor, but also a creative project. Any time of gestation is a
Yeah.
period of birth. Doesn't have to be a physical baby. And then, of course, menopause
Mm-hmm.
and death. Okay, these are all rites of passages. And then we have uh, cultural ones like in Christian baptism, confirmation, uh, what's the other? The Eucharist. These are all rites of passages where there's a ceremonial acknowledgement, a ritual, if you will, like, marking this really symbolic, significant time of a passage of in your period in your life. um, we also, marriage is another rites of passage. First prom,
Sure.
these
Yeah.
are all cultural rites of passages. But the thing that we have to remember is that these are, in every culture, this was an important period of initiation of an individual soul's evolution to the next stage of
Hmm.
their development. And again, it was something that was marked because it was important to mark. It was important not to just rush by at 900 miles an hour while you're texting and driving and eating and thinking about doing your laundry and what you have to do
Yeah.
tomorrow. This was
Yeah.
important to take a pause and go through a formal practice. And even just the girl's first period, the whole tribe would participate in that. It was a ceremony, it was a celebration of her passage from maidenhood to her womanhood and her ability to create and bring life. And then she would commune with the wise elder women in the tribe, because the women taught the women. Women taught the women how to be women, and men taught the men. And the interesting thing about the rites of passage for men and women were, history shows that the female rites of passage, Nathan, interestingly enough, were more celebratory.
Hmm.
Like, hey, you got your first period. It's amazing. Congratulations. You're a
Let's
woman
dance it
now.
out.
Yeah, your wedding, whatever. And men, for the men's rites of passage, they were often more physically grueling
Yeah.
because they had two important objectives different than the females. They were to strengthen the man's character, physical and emotional character, and also to help teach him to channel his aggression.
Yeah.
So now, for young boys, without having these formal rites of passage, which are acknowledged, celebrated, taught, they seek them out subconsciously, maybe through gangs or
Yeah.
whatever, like bad
Well,
places,
video
right?
games. I
There
mean,
you
even
go.
sports. Look at how popular sports are. And everybody's like, who the hell cares about sports? It's because men don't have any rite of passage any longer. They need to go out there on the gridiron and show how big and mad and fucking fierce they can be with
Tough.
with a ball in their hands, and they're going to run over the other enemies, and And all the men in the crowd are like, yeah,
And they get
because
on
they're
board.
craving it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and my wife just said something interesting. It's funny that we just had this conversation yesterday. She's like, every single month is a rite of passage for a woman. You're reminded, at least during your reproductive years, you're
Cool.
cycling, you've got the
Mm-hmm.
cramping, you got some bleeding. You are literally shedding the old and bringing in the new. And that's why perhaps if a woman was in charge, we wouldn't have a lot of the issues we have, which are so divisive. Women are like, we can take a step back. We've gone through some rites of passage. We don't need to go out there and seek war in order to prove ourselves or to transition to manhood necessarily. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
good. Now, I'm generalizing here, but there is some there's some really interesting nuance in here that is not really appreciated in in a civilized, comfortable life.
Yeah, no, I totally see what you're saying. And you know, the more I've studied back on the history of this and I apply it to what's going on in our modern world, I see like, yeah, I think collectively as a human race, our 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 psyches, our subconscious, our souls are looking for these moments of significance,
Yeah,
Nathan. Isn't that what
yeah,
it's all about? I mean, it's
right.
probably even what plant medicine, we're all looking for these experiences, you know, that are going to mean something, you know, that
Yeah,
are, we're going to feel something, you know, that's meaningful to us, you know? So, and we're looking for that connection and give meaning to life,
yeah.
you know. And I think that's a big root of a lot of people's angst and depression, anxiety. Like,
What the hell is
what's
all
the
this for?
what's the
Yeah,
point? Yeah,
yeah.
what's the every day is groundhog day. Just I struggle with that myself, you know.
Sure.
It's another day. I gotta do all this shit, do it, get on the weekend, do my laundry and shop and do it again on Monday. I mean, we
Yeah,
all go through it, you
yeah.
know. So, and that's why I'm grateful I've gotten this point in my life, because one thing I've learned, like my father died virtually young. He was only 72,
Mm,
and he had a huge funeral, a huge wake. And the thing that, and we were very close, and the thing that impacted me probably even more than his death was the reaction of all the people who came to the wake and the
yeah.
funeral, and what their sentiments about my dad. So what I learned indirectly from my dad and his death was, and again, I got my workaholism from my dad too,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, it's about relationships. That's what it's all about. It's about the connection of in life, the moments we share together. Because when you think back on your life of the good things, I mean, were you alone?
Mm,
You probably were on some cool trip with your, I don't know, a friend out or a family or a birth, or I don't know, some, you know, girls' night out or whatever it was, a birthday, hang gliding, whatever. I mean, you probably, how fun would it be if you have no one to share it with? You know,
yeah,
I think of being successful, rich, famous, who cares? Pick your thing. And you're alone.
yeah.
You know, you're alone on the beautiful mansion on the hill. Big deal. You know,
Right,
so
right,
at
right.
the end of the
Who cares?
day, that the meaning comes from the shared collective experience. And that brings us back to the rituals of the acknowledgement from our people that, wow, way to go, you're now a woman, you're now a man, you're on to this next phase, and now you can also teach the ones coming after you. And this is because, have you heard of the grandmother hypothesis?
I don't know. It depends on what you're referring to. Probably some variation of what you're saying, but I don't want to say something and it be totally wrong. So
I'm
tell me
sure you
your
have.
interpretation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just I believe it's a social and anthropological term that they coined for when they discovered that through evolutionary times, when women, humans, lived beyond just the reproductive years and were lived long enough to be grandmothers, so therefore went through menopause, that
Ah.
the species evolved because the grandmothers, they were no longer, you know, fertile. They were the ones that then raised the children, and they were the story keepers. They were the wisdom keepers
Oh,
of the
yeah.
tribes. They were the
Yeah.
ones who kept the, you know, the stories going and teaching the myths and everything to the younger generations, the wisdom of how to how to harvest the crops and how to follow the moon cycles. They were the teachers, and it was that time when the people lived long enough to pass on the earned wisdom
Right.
that things exponentially started really advancing culturally. And of course, the younger women were busy being pregnant or raising the newborns, the infants. But again, the toddlers, the adolescents,
Sure.
those were raised by
Sure.
the older generations. So
Right.
that's called the grandmother hypothesis, if anybody wants to look it up. And not for nothing, but
It's
the
beautiful.
only other mammals that have the grandmothers are whales and elephants.
No kidding.
Cool, huh?
That is super cool.
Yeah, because
You know,
they live long too.
yeah, it also brings something to mind. There's this very prolific thinker named Stephen Jenkinson. He's kind of on the same caliber as Charles Eisenstein for me, and I've gotten to know him a little bit over the years. And he has a school called the Orphan Wisdom School. And one thing I don't want to paraphrase him too much because he goes way deeper into this than I could just in paraphrasing. But the essence of one of the some story I read in one of his books was that we are living in a patriarchal society, but we have no father. There's something really important about that. And we're not saying that there are no good men or that men aren't, that there's too many single moms. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is we don't have any elders, yet we have a
Ah,
society based on a patriarchy that is steeped in ageism. So
wow.
if we're going to
Yes.
remain in a patriarchal hierarchical societal structure, and discard our elders, this is actually the primary issue with how we're living our lives in the United States, but it's in many parts of the world. Um, so it poses a pretty big dilemma for us based on everything you've just said, especially if our elders live longer when they're involved in raising our kin. Because not
Yeah.
only do they benefit, but our children benefit from grandma and great grandma's wisdom. Instead, it's like, oh, you guys are just old, just go watch your Jeopardy, grandma. And, of
Mm,
course they die. They die alone. They get these neurodegenerative issues. They stop moving. They become cemented in their recliner chair.
wow.
And they die very sad and lonely deaths in many regards. Not everybody, guys. I'm just saying it happens more than you would think, given the rich history of. I told you my story about taking down my mask and losing my job back in September. Best thing I
Mhm,
ever could have done. I lost my job. I went off onto my own, just like you did, back in September of last year. So by the time this episode comes out, probably around a year ago,
mhm.
and and I was getting to know this guy. He was 95. He's got, whatever. He's got heart failure, whatever it is. But this is the middle of the COVID pandemic. And I go in there, I take my mask off, rub lotion on his hands and feet, get to know him. Like I even hugged him at one point. I mean, he just hadn't seen a face, let alone had somebody
Wow.
touch him and love him in this way. And his
That's
family wasn't
medicine.
able to visit. This is medicine. I was providing him
Medicine.
the best therapeutic possible. And I don't know what happened to him because the next day I got fired because somebody reported me for taking down my mask.
Oh my God.
So 95 years, and your legacy is I'm just going to die alone in this nursing facility where people are afraid to touch me because they're going to give me cooties. And they used to say pneumonia is an old man's best friend. Well, this was a very sorry example of how we do
Wow.
not appreciate the wisdom and the the legacy work, that we could, the wisdom and through the legacy work we could be doing with these older people, whether it's a family member or just an elder in our community. Back then, this guy would have been one of the elders in the community. It's not a big
Of
city out here in
course.
Louisville, but instead he's locked away here, and we're not even letting people see him. No talking, no communication. He's just locked away in his cell. What a
That is
sad state.
horrible. That sounds
Yeah,
like prison. That's like how you torture a prisoner. You put
might
him in
as well
solitary
be.
confinement.
Yeah,
I mean, that's so sad because, like you, I've studied a lot Native American
yeah,
cultures, and as you know, they have such a respect for the quote unquote wise elders, and even in the tribes, I mean, they weren't allowed to speak if an elder was speaking or present in the room. They had to be given permission if they were younger chronologically than someone else to speak if that other person was even
wow,
there.
yeah.
I mean, there was such a respect for the wise elders, and that makes me think of, to me, one of the things that's the saddest human condition is feeling invisible
Mm,
and like you don't matter. And I think that's a problem for the older generation, is
that's
feeling
so true.
invisible. Particularly, I don't know, you'll have to tell us about the male experience, but like for females, young, attractive, I mean, youth now is a deity in our culture. A young 20-year-old female body with beautiful skin and shiny long full hair and the whole deal. But and then for women, as we get older, you kind of get invisible, so to speak, or less, attention. And it's like, oh God. And this is hence the whole anti-aging industry trying to, stay looking 25 when you're really 55,
Yeah.
you know. But to your point, I think that no one would want to feel invisible. We, at the end of the day, we all just want to feel acknowledged and valued and just seen. I see you. I
Yeah.
hear you. I feel you. I appreciate you. I might not agree with you, but I acknowledge you.
Yeah.
Like I see you. Look someone in the eyes and listen to them. And you might not like what you're hearing all the time, but I think there's an amount of like human compassion that's necessary in
Yeah.
that regard. Yeah. Hopefully
That's
that'll start
amazing.
changing though. Cause like, people like you and me, all we need is a group of people feeling this way to start including these wise elders, because
Yeah.
if God willing, we'll all be one of them one day.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we, yeah, yeah. We have, as we have these conversations, I think that's the reason that we have these conversations, is just to give other people permission to feel authentically into some of these truths. And
Mm,
that is that your grandmother should be the most important person in your life. Now, it doesn't matter what your relationship is with her. There is still there still needs to be some reverence for those people who have been here for 85 years.
mhm,
And without that reverence, nothing else can kind of succeed that. That's where we start. And yes, there might be reasons you don't like your grandma, or you can't be with your grandma, or whatever else.
mhm.
But if grandma is a representation of elders in general, we've lost the reverence for our elders. And that is something that hopefully we can shift with time. I certainly know that that's a part of our conscious parenting with our little girls. My mother drives me nuts, and her husband Paul drives me nuts at times, but there is still a need for reverence for her.
Of course.
And that's
Yeah.
my journey, that's my issue. If
Mhm.
I get frustrated with her or whatever else, it is your job as a parent to remind your kids that yes, it frustrates me, but this is a woman worthy of worship.
There you go.
um, and that's
Mhm.
hard. That's hard in our society because we don't really seem to practice that
Yeah.
as a collective.
That takes a lot of presence and maturity for someone to get that point. So
Yeah.
kudos to you. I think too that it's
Still working
cool
on it.
to, well, hey, we can, at least it's in your, in your radar.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think too, another cool thing with the elderly is, ask them questions. Ask them questions. Ask them, what was it like growing up for you? Or if you ever had this experience, or what do you think about this? Sometimes just giving them that voice of like that's demonstrating
Yeah.
respect. You're even caring what their opinion,
Right.
their viewpoint is, like, makes them feel important, makes them feel valued. Like, oh, you care what I think. Like, it doesn't mean you're going to agree, it
Sure.
just means you're being asked. It's like
Yeah.
someone asking your Nathan, what do you think about taking this or whatever, what do you think about home birth? I mean, just being asked your opinion is basically a form of flattery, that someone basically thinks enough about you to care what
Yeah.
your take on it is. So
Yeah.
I think that's a way of loving people,
I
is
think so too.
just asking them questions. I mean, telling their story,
Right.
or
Right.
their experience, because God knows you might learn something. You never know.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, right.
Amy, we've got a couple more minutes left. I
Yeah,
want to make sure I cover one more topic, and this gets back into the yin and yang. You have lived your life in a very masculine dominant state, as many of us have. This has nothing to do with your gender, your your genotype. We're talking about how have you focused your energy,
yeah.
your life force, and it
It's
has
like a
been in
mindset.
the, yeah, it's the
Mhm.
mindset. It's the how you show up was in the masculine through
Yeah,
athletics, businesses, etc.
yeah.
As you've started shifting to the feminine and really trying to nourish the yin as we described, You told me a little bit about some of your work with a friend of ours, Emily Abbott, who's a former high level CrossFit athlete who has shifted. She's been on my podcast. We haven't. I don't think I've published her episode yet, if I'm mistaken. But she and I got connected through my work, and she's doing a lot of pelvic floor work and embodiment work, especially for female clients. So you worked a little bit with her. Would you mind talking a little bit about what that was like and how confronting maybe it was for somebody who isn't used to nourishing that feminine side?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing, and she was on my show too, thanks to you,
Oh,
because
right
Paul
on.
hooked me up with her because you hooked him up with her. And, this is how it all goes, right? But she was great. We had a great episode. But I did hook up with her physically, literally face to face, my last visit with Paul recently. And it's interesting timing because if I had hooked up with her a few years back when I
Yeah.
first started this journey, Awakening Aphrodite, it would have been a very different experience.
Hell to the no.
Yeah, but surprisingly, I wonder how different because to be honest, the experience I did just recently have with her was more like I would have expected it to be 3 years ago.
Oh,
I don't know
really?
if that made any sense, but I think because we're talking about physical, so meeting her emotionally, spiritually, fine, no problem. We gelled. Like she's another one that I intend to work with shoulder to shoulder one day with women's retreats and courses. But I had her work with me personally on the holistic pelvic massage because, as I said, that's her another part of her work.
And it's internal massage?
Yes,
Whew.
and external. She
And
pretty
external.
much touched every part of me. Um, and I was very surprised, Nathan, to be honest, that I had the physical reactions that I was having just recently. And
Wow.
I would have thought my body was further along and more what's the word? I don't want to say more open to it. I guess just softer, receiving it, more comfortable being super vulnerable. Now, granted, it might have been because I had never met this woman. I heard about her. I met her. Next thing you know, I'm buck naked on some mattress in someone's room and she's touching me all over, in every orifice possible, so that
Good
might have been
grief.
part of it.
Yeah.
But I was surprisingly just what's the word? I don't want to say rigid, but just like I wasn't as flowy as I would have kind of thought, given my emotional, spiritual work I've
Yeah.
been doing on myself. But I guess that's a good thing. And the bigger picture, as you and I have spoken about, is I was proud of myself for even doing it because the former me it just would have been way too vulnerable, way too, I don't know, weird, the whole deal. But I'm in. I'm all in. I'm not joking around. Like I'm all in for fully integrating everything that Great Spirit made me to be.
Hmm.
I want to poke every orifice. I want to open every door. I want to unearth every crack, every nook, every cranny. I want to suck the juice out of this thing when
Yeah.
I'm gone. And I
Yeah.
want to say I lived my life to the fullest I could live. And so I have discretion saying yes and no, but I don't like saying no to things that certainly scare me, like back to our initial
Yeah.
conversation, plant
Right. It
medicine.
can't be just the fear
Yeah,
alone that is the only
yeah.
reason you say no. Yeah, I hear you there.
And the uncomfortableness and back to the uncertainty. I mean, the whole thing and the embarrassment and the shame and the whole thing. And then you got the body stuff, which you deal with all the time, the body
Mm.
shape, smell, odor, whatever, look, feel, pick it, right? We all
Yeah.
have our mental
Yeah.
loops of like the judgment and the who knows.
Sure.
But anyway, so I don't know if that's the long way of answering. It was a surprising experience for me. I guess I didn't it didn't happen the way I thought it
Yeah.
would. I thought it was going to be frankly more like pleasurable for me, but it was still very instructive because it was what it was.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and it was valuable. And again, the bigger picture was I was proud of myself for giving myself that gift and being brave and going
Yeah.
there, you know.
Yeah. I'm proud of you too. Because if I put myself on that table, it has nothing to do with even what the practice is. It's being exposed, being vulnerable in that way.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
somebody's going to go inside of your body as well. I mean, gosh,
Mhm.
when we talk about birth a lot, it's the people putting their hands in places without getting consent. I mean,
Wow.
You paid this person money,
Yeah.
Emily, money to do a therapeutic technique that she's trained to do. And she did everything as gently and
Mm-hmm.
compassionately as possible. And it was still confronting.
Yeah.
So then women go into a hospital and somebody shoves their hand in their vagina, or they go to the GYN clinic and somebody shoves a cold speculum in without any preparation, no eye contact, no acknowledgement that there's a person in front of me. It's just
A body.
a body. I'm going to shove this thing in there and open it up and, sit still or whatever, move your butt closer. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
like we have to appreciate how sacred this process is and how compassionate we need to be when a person maybe is bringing a lot of trauma into the room and they're laying down
Yes.
and they're asking you to hold them and to take care of them. So it's scary to do what you did. And I also think it's
It
probably
was.
scary for Emily knowing, oh my gosh, this is for anybody. This is going to be very confronting. I need to approach this in a delicate way. But the OBGYNs who claim to have domain over a woman's body, even more so than the woman herself, can't seem to wrap their heads around why this is precious. This is something that needs to be um, you know, not tiptoed around, but it needs to be done through the lens of compassion and wanting to care for
Respect. Yeah.
somebody and
And
respect
reverence.
and reverence. There's that word again.
Yes. And there's a level of implied trust there that is critical.
Yeah,
And to your point, yes, Emily provided that, and we refer to this back with my work with Paul or anybody guiding you in plant medicine or any
yeah,
vulnerable journey, that you have to be in a safe container in
yeah,
order to let go. The feminine needs to feel safe, you know, in order to be vulnerable. Because being vulnerable, and that's a misconception, and vulnerable is
yeah.
passive. There's a difference
Right,
between
right.
receptive and vulnerable and being passive, right? This is a big confusion with the feminine, which leads to a lot of depression in women because they say, "Oh, I'm going into my feminine," and they withdraw, and then they just kind of like do nothing. And it's like
Yeah,
that doesn't feel good. That's called disempowerment. Okay, that's not being feminine and receptive. But that's another story.
yeah,
But to your point, yes, it must have been scary for Emily, but she held her responsibility with the utmost professionalism and regard, and knew what gift I was giving her and trusting her with my total physical,
mm,
emotional, exposed vulnerability. And she was extremely gentle and just what you would want a female
yeah,
to be, in that essence of soft and asking questions.
yeah,
Is this okay? I'm going to do this. Like you said, telling me beforehand. Now I'm going to put my hands here. Is that all right with you? Getting consent. Yes, it is. Just tell me if it's too much, if it's too this. It's, you know, so she was constantly barometer, you know, getting my temperature, checking in. Is this okay? How are we
yeah.
doing?
I love
And a
that.
lot of it for her, she shared with me with her clients, was these women have to find their voice too.
Yeah,
Of the women have to learn to speak up and say, and not please her,
yeah.
as it, which is the example for it all, right? Like not trying to please your partner, whether it be in sex or anything in life, but speaking your voice, like, you know what, your boundary. Like, and I had to even at one point tell Emily, you know, and Emily, I think that's enough for today. I just kind of felt like my body was done.
It
And
was, it was,
she
yeah,
even remarked like, wow, Amy, because I was kind of a little emotional, I was crying a little bit. And she said, you know, good for you. A lot of women can't say that, like they don't want to hurt my feelings or whatever. And I was like, good, I'm glad I did something right.
sure,
But you
sure.
know, you know, speaking up for our needs and not apologizing is a big part of our evolution and finding our voice and standing on our own feet with strength as well
Yeah,
as vulnerability.
that's right.
Yeah. It was a powerful
Uh,
experience, Nathan.
yeah,
I intend to work with her more. I
sure.
apparently need more follow up, but it was a good it just was a great experience just for, again, you know, isn't it all about self-awareness?
Sure,
I need
sure.
to be aware that that part of me is a little bit stuck. You know, I'm going to have to, I don't want to say work on it. That sounds so not, I don't know, not cool, but you know what I mean? Just something I'm going to have to start bringing some more awareness and putting more priority attention of my energy, that I have to schedule time to
Yeah.
nurture that part of me. Apparently is a little bit blocked.
Yeah, I'm going to send a book to you. It's a book called Grounded by a woman
Okay.
named Erin McMorrow. She's a PhD in urban planning of all things. But in her
Uh,
book, she actually combines soil health with femininity and with birth and death and sensuality, and mix and combines all of this beautifully. You'd be surprised. It's only 200 pages or something, or not even that, but she does this exquisite job of combining a lot of the topics of everything we just covered in our interview
Wow.
all into one, including in my interview with her. You can go back and listen to it.
Oh,
She
yeah.
describes how she uses like wands in order to open her throat, like down her throat, to open her second chakra, which is so linked to her throat chakra,
Oh, I was
which
going to
is
say
so
all the
linked
way
with her.
down there.
Yeah, right, right. That's
Whoa,
a
that's a
long
long
wand.
wand.
No, to open her throat chakra, which is so intimately connected with your sacral chakra. And I just think you guys would really get along well. In fact, she might even be a good podcast guest. But I'll introduce you, and we'll get all of
Please.
that sorted
What's
outside.
her last name?
McMorrow, McMorrow. If anybody out there wants to hear an amazing
Yeah.
interview, I was
Boy,
so proud of this one, and we went for like 2.5, almost 3 hours.
I
It was
missed
just
that
like,
one.
yeah, yeah.
I'm going to look it up.
I'll link it in the show description and send you an email as
I
well.
thought for sure I heard all your
Yeah,
interviews. I love your show.
yeah. Oh, thank you, thank you. Amy, how can people find you? Tell everybody what they need to know.
Great. Well, they can check out my podcast too, which you were on, by the way. I believe it's episode 89, where Dr.
Hey,
Nathan Riley was on Awakening
I'd
Aphrodite. It was phenomenal. And we're having you back because
love to.
if we got to finish what we didn't talk about. We didn't have as much time as we have today. So we'll talk about that when we go offline.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah.
and I know that was a popular one too. People want you back. But my podcast is Awakening Aphrodite. My
It's a lovely
website
show.
is my name, where you can get a free mini ebook if you join my email list. And that's just amyfournier.com. And my social media is Fit Amy TV, as well as my YouTube channel, which is Awakening Aphrodite, Fit Amy TV. And I think I'm going to really hold you up to that multiple group podcast. You, me, Nicole,
Sarah.
maybe even like Allison Pillow. She's another one
Yeah,
that's right
yeah,
in line with
yeah.
us.
I haven't met Allison either,
Yeah,
so
you'd resonate well with her
right
too.
on,
So
right on.
a lot of us
Amy,
will go
thank
on a
you.
tour.
Yeah, yeah, the traveling. We'll
Tour.
get like a little
Yeah,
school bus or something and
yeah,
travel around talking about archetypes. And
you
I'll
got
step
it.
back and I'll just moderate the conversation and throw in
No,
little
no,
quips here
no.
and
We
there,
need you
some
in there.
soundboard like, whoa,
No, no. You got too much wisdom. We need you in there. Thank you,
Oh
Nathan. Thanks for
man,
having
thank
me.
you. It's my pleasure, Amy.